Okay, this is Thursday the 27th. We're on assignment J tonight, despite the fact that the World Series could come to an end tonight if the Cardinals don't win. And I was just kind of mentioning the fact that for assignment J, we're going to put sheets together. We're going to start by making our own title block, really customizing the title block I've built for you. And then we're going to load it into our project, which is going to be what you have from assignment G. And if you've loaded your family, countertop family, that H would be in there as well. In order to get the credit for assignment J correctly, you don't have to have all of the building content perfect. You just have to have the sheets put together, the views sized up on the sheets, and that kind of thing. And so one of the things we haven't done yet is if I pull up the 3D of my model here, and I turn off the section box here so that you can see the whole model, and this is a new view. Notice how I don't have my foundation walls in yet. In order to get the basement plan to show up properly, I'm probably going to go ahead and throw in some foundation walls tonight. I'm not going to grade you off on exactly how you build those foundation walls yet, because assignment J is all about sheets, not so much finishing the whole building. At the end of the semester, I'm going to have a final assignment, which will be the sheets that we're starting tonight plus some additional sheets. So when you turn in your final project, it'll give you a chance to polish off everything, and then I'll go back and grade everything one last time based on everything being complete. So the concepts tonight to learn about is how a title block works and how a sheet works, and how a sheet uses title blocks and then views go on the sheet. And one kind of parallel I like to draw to AutoCAD. I assume, again, most of you have used AutoCAD. How many of you, I can't remember if I've asked this in this class before, but how many of you have done paper space to lay out sheets in AutoCAD? Okay, when you first learned that, did it just seem like, okay, I know everything I need to know in 15 minutes? Probably not. I mean, some people may learn it a little better than others, but to me, paper space is messy at best. I mean, it works. You can get it to do what you want it to do, but what happens if you have a view? Well, I don't want to say view because that's the Revit term, but in AutoCAD, let's say you have a plan and you have it set up for 1/8 inch equals a foot, and you go to put it on a sheet and you realize, well, I could actually make that plan larger and I could change scale. In AutoCAD, if you decide to do that and you've already put dimensions and annotation in there, it's kind of a pain unless you use annotative scaling, which some of you, show of hands, if anybody's used annotative scaling, that's good if you have. Because the old AutoCAD dogs who use it for years and haven't learned some of the new concepts haven't taken to that yet. And without that concept, you have to go in and select your text and change the size. It's a mess. Revit just responds automatically to the scale change. And you've already seen that a little bit in the working views we've been using, where I say, okay, I'm going to change the scale to 1/2 inch so I can see it larger, change the scale back down to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot so I can see the text of the dimensions. So once you put views on sheets, that becomes all the more apparent as to how well Revit handles scale and annotation. And rather than the complexity of having to open a viewport like you do in paper space, you have viewports in Revit. They use that term once you put a view on a sheet, but I think you'll find it's just much more direct. And there's also not that nebulous kind of model space where you plop things out there in non-land before you've got a viewport to show them on the sheet. Okay, so the first step tonight, let me go ahead and open up the, I'm going to pause the recording for just a second here and find the right button. Okay, so first step tonight is to create a new title block family. I have my other project open, but I'm not actually going to use it yet, so I'm just going to keep it open in my Revit window for now, close my hidden windows, and just let it be in the background. So the first step is to create a new title block. Now, when you go to the application menu and say new, we found that we've done new project at the beginning of the semester, and then we did new family last week where we created a custom casework family. And we saw that there were a whole series of templates for different types of families, different categories of family. Now we're going to create a title block which has its own little button in here. So when you say new, you don't say family and select title block, you say new title block. And then that will point you to the title block subfolder, of which I have the one that starts with the word title block, which is how I recommend always naming your title block files, because otherwise they get lumped in with all the other annotation. And you know how you can go down in your browser to families, there's not a category listed in families for title blocks. Even though they give it their own folder in the library system, they don't give it their own nested category in the browser. So for that reason, we're going to save ours with the word title block on the front. So we're going to select that template. It's the 11 by 17 landscape right, meaning the title block's on the right, for ARC 124 version 2011. And because it's an RFT, that's a template to create a new family. So when you select it and hit open, you should get what looks like a pretty well finished title block. And we're just going to tweak it in a few ways here. So I want to point out the basics to start with. First of all, we're in the family editor again. Kind of like we did last week, but remember we had on home we had extrusion, sweep, blend, revolve, all those basic solid forms and void forms. We don't have those in a title block family because we are just creating lines and text and labels and things like that that are just two-dimensional. So also note in your family editor here that the browser just has, under views, there's virtually no views. There's a sheet, which is kind of the view that we're in, the sheet view of the title block. And then there's a revision schedule, which I'm going to talk about later if we have time. That's not really covered in the assignment, but it's kind of an additional advanced topic that I'd like to touch on. So, and then there are no families in here, so we haven't loaded any families. But one thing you can add is if you have a logo that's a JPEG file, you can insert an image into your title block. So if you all would like to customize your title block by kind of throwing a logo in there, you're welcome to do that. In fact, there could be a half a bonus point in it for you. I'll try to add that to the to the rubric. What's that? PNG file? Yes, it can be PNG, JPEG, or, believe it or not, bitmap, which is so outdated that nobody uses it anymore. So you can go into image. So I'm just going to do a quick kind of example here. I'm going to go ahead and throw that in. I don't normally do this, but why not? So I'm going to go back to the class homepage here. Actually, I go to my website. Actually, I don't want to do that from here. Let's just open a separate window. It's kind of strange. There we go. So if I wanted to just capture part of that, I can do a screen capture, kind of like we did in assignment A. So I'm going to go Alt Print Screen, which will just capture the current window. Then I'm going to open up my Microsoft Paint. There it is in the Start menu. And this is always a little confusing when you... Come on, Paint. Wow. You think you have the actual screen and you just have an image of the screen here. So I'm just going to capture part of my insignia there. Go to a new empty file. And I'm going to save that. So I'm going to put that in my folder where I save all my files. Wow, the network is slow tonight. And I'm going to save it as a PNG, which has transparency if you want to. You can actually erase corners out of that if you wanted to superimpose it on something. I'll call it HDSA logo partial.ping. And then I can go back and say, okay, I'm going to insert that right here. So I go to Insert Image, and I just select my logo and plop it down. It gives you the four corners. I can rotate it 90 degrees with the rotate button. And then I can just pull the corners and stretch it. Just kind of sneak it in that corner there. Then the other things you can do is you can change the font and the text size and dress it up a little bit that way. And then I'm going to have you actually fill in some of this manually. Now, a title block is made up of two types of text elements. There's a standard piece of text, which this whole block up here in the upper right corner is, where it says ARC whatever, Introduction to BIM for Architects Using Autodesk, Revit Architecture, whatever. And then it has the section 650, and then the term. So this is going to be fall 2011. So this part right here, you can just edit like you would a piece of text. So I'm going to click on that, click it again, and say this is ARC 124, and it's using Revit Architecture 2011. So your points for getting the title block corrected, don't forget to do these little things, but I want you to see the difference between just editing pieces of text and working with these other things. So then I'm going to select the end of this and say this is fall 2011. We are section 650, so that part doesn't have to change. And all these others are pieces of text. Now right here where it says student's name, if you hover over that, instead of saying, like when I hover there, it says text notes, text, and it gives the type name. If I hover over student's name, it says instead label, 11 by 17 student's name. Now let's go ahead and select that, and let's just see what makes that tick, because that's actually going to be your name rather than typing it in the title block. I want you to make a title block that you could load into your project, and that way if you wanted to say, this is Hayden Smith, this is Dan Overman, or whoever, you type that in the project rather than just saving it hardwired into the title block. So if you select that label, and then you go edit type here, you'll see the properties of the actual label, which is just its size, its font, its color, space, that kind of thing, which is purely irrespective of the content of what that says. So I could change my font for that label to say I want to use Georgia, which is kind of my signature font that I use a lot. Georgia. And I could even change the color of it, just for the heck of it, to that color I use on my website, if I can find it. And then when I say OK, it comes up in that font and that color. But if you select it again and go back in the Properties button, Properties palette, there's a button that says Edit Label. And the term label is a little bit confusing in Revit because it actually means 2 or 3 different things. First of all, at the macro level, a label is a piece of text, kind of like an attribute in a block in AutoCAD. A label can take on the value that you feed it inside the project. So it's just a placeholder as far as the contents when you're editing the title block. When you load the title block and use it, then that will fill in with whatever the name is of the person that you said is going to be. And I believe the label property is called the owner. So if I edit that label, see where it says it's client name. So there's a parameter built into Revit called client name that allows you to say who your client is when you're doing an architectural project. And so I'm going to kind of use that to say this is actually your name and you are your own client in this pretend project we're doing. And then this sample value here, and this is a hard concept for everybody to get sometimes. This is only what you're going to see when you're editing the title block. So you want to make sure that you don't type out your name here. You just leave it to say student's name and let that parameter actually supply the value for it. So now, just to kind of demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and save, and if you're working along with me, go ahead and take the time to save what you have. So we want to do save as.
I see in the instructions it says save it as an RFA file.
Right. It'll be saving.
RFT?
Well, yeah, you can't actually save an RFT. The RFT is the template you use to create it. So
it just change itself automatically? Or?
Yeah, because when you first say new and you pick the RFT, it opens up an RFA and it calls it, like what is mine called until I save it? It's called Family 1. And it hasn't been saved, so if I forget that I've just created it, I'm safe. If I hit the save button, it forces me to tell it where to go, what to call it, and it's going to force it to be an RFA. So that's an important distinction to understand is whenever you use a template, whether it's a project or a family, you never say open the template. You say new, and you select which template you're using to create it, and it will automatically convert the file from an RFT to an RFA or an RTE to an RVT. Sometimes people make the mistake of opening the template, But in Revit templates for families, it's harder to do that by mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and go out to my folder here, and I'm going to call this title block. This is the one time where I want you to put your name at the end instead of the beginning. So 11 by 17, and this is a landscape format. So I put -L and then -RT to indicate that instead of the title block running along the bottom of the landscape format, it's running along the right side. And then after that, you can just put your name. So I'm going to put Smith H. And save it. Okay. Now, I still have my project open. If I Control Tab, there's my project, there's my title block. So let's just go ahead and do a test. I'm going to load this into the project just like we did with our countertop. And again, this little option has been around for several versions of Revit. Instead of going to the project and saying, okay, insert load family, browsing for where you saved it, if the family is open, you just hit this load into project button. It loads it into open files. So I say load, and it says, oh, you've got this other project open. I'm going to load it in there. Now, it gives me this message because it assumes that as soon as I load it, I want to actually create something with it. And it's just telling me that you can't create a sheet using a title block when you're in a 3D view. So I can just close that. I say, yeah, I understand. Like when I load the countertop, it thinks I want to go ahead and place it. And if I'm in a plan view, I can just go right ahead and place it. But in the case of a title block, it's just telling me that. So now, let's go ahead and create ourselves a test sheet here. And there are a couple other sheets already in the project that I had just put in there to show how things develop as you're going. So if you had peeked at those earlier in the semester, you'd notice the plan that we were creating had already been put on the sheet. The L0 exists, Arch 064, and L1. Let's create a new sheet. And there are two ways to create a new sheet. You can go to, which of the ribbon tabs would you expect to go to for a sheet? Because a sheet is really not a model element, it's a view, really. So we go to the View tab, and there's a Sheet Composition panel, and there's a Sheet button there that creates a new sheet. But the way I like to do it is kind of an alternate way, and that is if you're looking at the browser where your sheets are listed, and since I've already got a couple sheets, they're listed there, if you just right-click on that heading that says Sheets, it'll give you an option to create a new one. Then it asks to pick which title block you're going to use. Now, I don't want to use the one that was already there that I had created those two default sheets for you. You want to use the one that you just saved and loaded that has your name on the end. And then there's two types within that family that I had already built in for you. Let's just go ahead and do the one that says with layout grid. And we'll say, okay. I right-clicked on the, where it says sheets here, right-click, and there's a new sheet option there. But you can also hit the sheet button up here in the ribbon. Either way, it'll do the same thing. I just like this method because I'm looking at what sheets I have, and then I can say, okay, I want another one. I create it, and then it shows up below the ones that were already there. You pick the title block. Now, if you had forgotten to load the right title block, you'd have an option to load it right now before you finish creating the sheet and then pick it. But we want to use the one we just loaded. I want to use the one that shows the layout grid, and I just say OK. Now, I can tell I've got the right one because I had plopped that little logo, and I had changed the color of the text for the client name there. And so it plugs in the word owner in the slot that's used for the client name. And if you compare that to one of the other sheets that I already had in there, obviously that default sheet doesn't have nearly as much in the title block. So you can tell you've used the right one here. Any questions on that? Yeah. Okay, hang on just a second here. Go ahead and just pause this for a second. Resume resume recording. Okay, so now here's the part where you can get confused easily as you're starting out with this whole process. It's kind of hard to tell now whether you're in the project looking at a sheet or you're in your title block file. This is a sheet. That was the old sheet that was already there. This is my project, obviously, because that's my 3D view. This, however, is my title block family. And I'm control tabbing between all my open views here. I don't need that view open. This is my new sheet that I just created. This is the old sheet. This is the 3D view, and this is the title block. Now, one way I can tell the difference is the fact that it spells out that sample text. It says student's name. But if I go back to the project and I open the one that I had created, it says owner. So now I can click on that owner and click again, and I can type out my name. Notice how the other edits I made in the title block do show up, because that's just plain old text right there. That's not, these aren't labels, they're just hardwired text. But this part right here can be edited inside the project because it's a label. And again, don't get confused by the fact that it says student's name. If you edit the label, now I said the term label is used in a couple ways. First of all, at a macro level, the label is a piece of text that can have that placeholder. The second way they use that term is the actual parameter that's been assigned to what goes in that label. So the label has a label. How's that for, that's like having a definition of a word and a word used in its own definition or something. It's like I'm going to build a house, and to build a house I'm going to use houses to build it with. It's kind of stupid, but that's what they do. So that's a label. And if I edit the label of that label, then I'm picking which of these parameters are going to be used to plug in what that label says. So in this case, what it's picking from here is what are called project information. And project information is something that's built into Revit in a project. So here I am in my project. This is the new sheet I created. And if I change that to Hayden D. Smith and I put the AIA on the end here, I've just edited some of my project information. And the way to find out where that's stored is to go to the Manage tab in your project ribbons and go to Project Information right here. And so here are all the parameters that are built in that it refers to as project information. And there's the client name right there. So what we use is client name in the label. Now it says Hayden D. Smith. If I just change it to Hayden, then that will change it in that title block. And not only that one, but also, well, this particular title block, this default one, doesn't even have the name of the client built into it, so you don't really see it change there. But if I change the project name, I got to make sure I'm in my project, and I can say project name. I'm going to go ahead and fill that out as Hayden's.
Awesome.
Yeah, okay. Mansion on the hill. Okay, so that has now been stored in project information. There it shows it. And then if I go to that other sheet that was already here, it says Hayden's Awesome Mansion on the Hill. But notice how the text on that title block is bigger than the text in the title block I created and edited here. And so that shows that there can be different title blocks with different size labels and different fonts and all that. And a good example is when you're doing a set of CDs, you might have some sheets that are 24 by 36, and then when the project goes into construction, you might do supplemental sheets to issue during construction on 8.5 by 11. In the old days, we used to fax them. Now you're going to email them anyway, or print them out and take them to the job site, whatever. But you can have more than one title block that sets up different paper sizes, but those labels will still read exactly the same. So if I change the spelling or the title of my project to Hayden's Wonderful Mansion on the Hill, not only will it change it in all the 11 by 17 sheets, it will also change it on the 8.5 by 11 sheets or the 24 by 36 sheets if I've built my title blocks correctly. So that's the idea. And in AutoCAD, you're probably used to using XREFs for your title block, or maybe a block with attributes. Now, if you use Architectural Desktop or AutoCAD Architecture, it can actually plug in that kind of stuff through sheet sets, but I don't know if any of you actually used it in that sophisticated of a way. Okay. I never went that far when I was using AutoCAD because I moved on to Revit, but this is how Revit allows you to customize those things. So, in the title block, certain things are project-wide values and certain things are sheet-specific values. Well, obviously, the sheet number should be sheet-specific. So that sheet that I just created, it called it A102Y. Why? Because there was already a sheet A102X in the project. And so it just takes the last sheet that was created or renamed and increments it up one notch. That's how I happened to pick that. So I'm going to renumber that sheet. And I can do that one of two ways. I can click on the title block until it's selected and then click on that text. See how the text lights up darker blue? Click on it and I can change that. And our first sheet that we're going to do is our demolition sheet, D101. So I can go ahead and do that. And so now notice how it changes it in the browser as well as on the title block. Then I can click there and change it to say demolition plans. I can spell or type. And so whatever I do in the title block changes it on the browser. I can also right click, rename it there, and I can spell it out here in this little box, which changes it there and again in the title block, assuming you have a properly built title block. So that's why I kind of saved you the trouble of having to start from scratch. Now there are title blocks that come with Revit, but they all say Autodesk Revit, and they're just kind of pre-formatted. So this is something that you'll have to kind of learn to customize. And if you want to make a title block, if some of you are doing studio project in here or later and you want to use a Revit title block, you're welcome to take the one that you use for my class and kind of slice it and dice it and resave it and move things around, change the size and hack it together to what you need. That's easier than just creating these things from scratch. Now we want to change the project number in our project. And again, you don't do this from inside the title block editor. You do this from inside the the project. So then I want to click on where it says project number, and that's going to be, let's see, how did I have that in the handout? At the very end of the handout, I show what the sheet should look like. And I have 2007 124 is what we'll call for our project number. Or no, not 2007. I was reading that. 2011-124. So that's the year and the class number. That's our pretend project number. And then project status, I'm going to click in there and say assignment A for today. And then when you turn these in again for the next week's project, that will be assignment K, so you want to edit that. But that will change in all the title blocks in your project because that project status falls under this project information right here. So you change it one place and it changes in all the sheets in your project. And then we have the title, we have the date that it's issued, which is going to start out with today's date whenever you create the sheet. But you can always edit that. So let's say it comes next Thursday and you're ready to turn this in, and that's November 3rd, I think. Then you can edit that individually by sheet because each sheet could have a different date that it's issued. And then from there, that's pretty much everything. This little piece of text down here automatically gives the current time and date. So if I plot that either on the plotter, the printer, or I make a PDF, which is how I'm going to teach plotting in here so we don't just waste a lot of paper, that date will be built into the PDF file or put on paper, either way. And I put that small, but I do like having that in there, and I know a lot of people, the old school thought with architects is, well, once we start going to AutoCAD, we don't put that date where the contractor will see it because it might confuse him. Well, to me, I always have the official date it's issued, but then I always have that date and time it's printed so that he knows he's got the very latest copy that I issued. And if sometimes, you know, if you're hurrying to plot things before you issue drawings, you catch a mistake, you go and correct it and you replot it. You don't want the one that you had plotted before you corrected it to go out the door. You want the one that was corrected. So it's nice to have that date and time in there just to cross-check yourself, if nothing else. So any questions so far? I'm in the project here. I'm going to go back to the title block now so I can do some more editing. So here's the title block family. And again, one way I can tell is because it has that placeholder text, student's name. But the other way I can tell that I'm in the family editor for the title block is look how much simpler the ribbon is when I'm in the family. Whereas the project has home, insert, annotate, analyze, all those buttons in the tabs. The title block just has home, insert, view, manage, add-ins, and modify. So it's a very simplified interface. You don't have all the views, you don't have all the families. There's very little to it. So let me go to the handout and see what else we're going to do next. Okay, so we're going to change the text size for the project name, and we're going to pick a font for that. So I said you can change that text size to 11/64. You don't have to use that size if you can pick another size that works, but I'm just giving you that as kind of an example that should work. So I'm going to select that label, which lists the project name in it. I'm going to edit the type now. I'm not editing what the parameter is that gets plugged in there, because that's already fixed for us. I'm just going to edit the type, which says, okay, what font, what text size, and again, I said 11/16, and then I'm going to change it from Times New Roman to my font. You know, you can pick a font that you like. I'm going to use Georgia, and I'm going to leave it black. Now, the next thing I want to point out is that you might have noticed, in the project on this sheet, how it wrapped Hayden's Awesome Mansion on the Hill on 2 lines. That's because that text in that title block that was already in here was larger, and it's going to start to wrap when it gets close to the end of the line. When you hover over it, notice how you can see a box that actually goes a little bit past that dividing line up here. So that is determined by, when you're editing the title block, how far this is stretched. And what I've found is if you stop it right where you think you should stop it, right by that line, it's going to wrap prematurely ahead of that line. So I like to carry it past just a little bit like that. And then, if I load it into my project, I can overwrite the existing title block. I can go back to that sheet. And now I'm going to go ahead and fill in, whoops, it's already filled in, Hayden's Awesome Mansion on the Hill. And see how it just fits. Let's say I had something just a little bit longer than that on the hill. Or I could be the fool on the hill, as the Beatles would say. So I'm going to have to do something with that to make it fit. So I go back to my title block here, and I would say, okay, I'm going to have to reduce that down from 11/64 to 10/64, which is kind of work out to 5/32. And then if I reload it, back into my project and overwrite it, and look at that sheet again, now it fits. And so that's something you may have to do depending on the title that you pick. If you pick a shorter title, you can make that piece of text larger. Now, when you're setting up an office and you want to have standard title blocks in your library, you're not necessarily going to know how long that piece of text needs to be. So what I do is I have a standard 11/17 title block, I have a standard 24/36, and I just pick a size, and when I load it in and set up my project, if I need to edit that, I'll go out and select it and say I'm going to edit that family, and then I'll shrink that down a little bit so it'll fit. But I don't bother to save that edited version of the title block back into my library because it may change every time I have a new project. Each owner's name may be longer or shorter, who knows. And there's no point in overwriting that one back in the library every time because that's something I just kind of accept the fact that I'm probably going to have to edit that from time to time by the project. So I'm going to go on and see what else we need to monkey with here. Okay, we've changed the text size. I'm kind of explaining in the handout here. We've loaded it. Sheet number and sheet name. So you can actually change the size of the text used in the sheet number if you want. This is in my project, so I have to remember to go back to my title block family. And that A101 is just a placeholder again. So I'm going to edit that type, and I'm going to make it a little bit taller. It's 3/16, so I'm going to make it 7/32. And then, actually, I'm going to make it 1/4 of an inch high, 8/32. And it's bold already. Okay, and then if that gets too big, I could squash it width-wise. There's a width factor. I could change that to 0.9 or something, and that will actually narrow up the text. So you can play with these things, and then the same, I could change the font of that and say, okay, I want it to be Arial Black, let's say, which is very bold. There we go. So now if I load that back into the project again, it overwrites. I say overwrite. Now I didn't overwrite this one because that's the sheet that was already there with its title block. But if I go into this view, there's the D101. So now I've bolded, I've made my Arial Black font apply to the sheet number. So now any sheet I create, which will be D101 and A101 for tonight, will have that larger text on them. Any questions?
Is it right for you?
Yeah. You hear? Yeah. So this is the label that's filling in the sheet number. So if I change it to A101 here, it changes it there, and on my browser down here, just change it to A101. I could also rename it there and say I want that to be D101. And so that changes it here and there. So the properties of the sheets are applied to the tile block where they show up. And then on the final assignment, we're going to learn how to put a drawing list together so you can list all your sheets in the project automatically in a schedule. Okay, so now the next thing I want to talk about here is the fact that I've got this kind of non-print grid that I use to lay out my sheets. Yeah, I'm still recording. Just want to make sure. I like to be able to say, okay, if I have 4 drawings on a sheet, I want to divide the sheet into fourths and put them on there. If I have 3 drawings, I could have 3 kind of long elevations that go on the sheet, and they'd be stacked on top of each other. So I kind of work out this grid that divides the sheet in halves both ways, and in thirds both ways, and in quarters both ways. So then if you're doing details, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3. I have a grid of 12 details on that sheet size. But you don't want that to print. And what Revit does not give us is the ability to just draw lines that show up on the screen but don't print. Now within a family, you can have lines that you can see when you're editing the family, but they don't print. But those lines won't show up when you're looking in the project. So what I chose to do is I made a line style in my title block, and it's actually, when you're inside the title block, it's actually a subcategory. So if I go to Manage Object Styles, which is kind of analogous to the VG, but for your whole file, not just for the view you're in, notice this title block, everything is listed under title blocks here as the categories. So I created these 3 line styles that have that purple color, and this will be a test to see how young some of us are. Actually, Ina, you've got a scarf that color on. That matches perfectly. You remember the days of the Diazo blueprint machines when you had the ammonia and everything in the yellow sheet, and we had a pencil that was purple that wouldn't print, so you could actually sketch boundary lines on there and print it, and the purple would go away. Well, now everything is that light blue non-copy color, which I don't even see that much either. But I've kind of gotten in the habit of using that purplish, light purple color as my non-print color. And I have long dash, dash, and solid styles. The problem is I have to turn those off when I go to print my sheet. Otherwise, the sheet will print out with those light purple lines. Or if it's printing here on black and white, they'll be kind of light gray because they turn to a shade of gray. So what I've done inside the title block is I've got those set up. If you select the line and you go into visibility, and I always have to find it on here. Well, actually, it's in the properties, I'm sorry. So where it says visible, it's grayed out, and there's an equal sign. I have a parameter that says display layout grid. And so the type that says current to plot does not have that box checked. And the type that says with layout grid has that checked. So here's how it works. When you load it into your project, and I have an actual sheet on the screen, I select my title block component, and I go up here and I say, okay, I want to change it from the type that says with layout grid to the type that says current to plot. And that turns off that grid. You can do this same trick if you wanted with a door, I know I saw some doors have a kick plate at the bottom. You can say, okay, I have a 36 by 84 door with a kick plate and a 36 by 84 door that doesn't have a kick plate. So then that would just be a checkbox in the door type properties that would say kick plate or unchecked kick plate. Same kind of principle here in the title block. I've just unchecked that box in this type so you don't see the grid. So when I create a sheet, I normally start out, if I think I'm going to have more than one view on the sheet, with the grid displayed. And then the danger of that is when you go to print, you might forget to change it back, and you might have a whole bunch of sheets, and some of them might have the grid and some might not. So if I go ahead and create another sheet here, right-click New Sheet, and I'm going to use the layout grid again, and I'm going to call this A101, which is our other sheet we're going to make tonight. So let's say I've got this sheet and I want to swap it out, current to plot, so I can plot my sheets. But I forget to go back to the D101 and change it. Well, there's a trick that Revit has. If you remember the right-click Select All Instances, one of my favorite right-click, Select All Instances in an entire project, that selects any title blocks of that family with that type, meaning the ones that have the layout grid, and then I can just change them all simultaneously to current to plot. And that makes sure that I've turned off the grids in all my title blocks for all my sheets of that particular title block family. And then I'm ready to print. So I'm going to go ahead and swap that back out because on the D101 sheet we're actually going to want to see the grid so we can put the demolition plan of the first floor here and the basement level there side by side. So I'm going to go ahead and save the recording and stop it for now so that we can, I'm going to call that assignment J, part 1, title